The phrase alt-right got a lot of media play during the presidential race, even though some voters weren't entirely sure what it meant. Now an increasing number of news organizations say it's time to change that by explaining the term in depth or maybe even retiring it for good. Adam Riley has more.
Well, what is the alt-right movement?
Great question. But in the run-up to the election, it was hard to get a clear answer.
The core belief that white identity is under attack.
A conservative movement many say is fueled by racism, sexism, and anti-Semitism.
It's more accurate to say that the alt-right cares about Western supremacy rather than white supremacy.
The debate had big political ramifications because before Steve Bannon became CEO of the Trump campaign, he ran Breitbart News, which he called the platform for the alt-right. Now Bannon has a new job.
Chief strategist and senior counselor to the president.
And a growing number of news organizations say it's time to dispel any alt-right ambiguity. The AP wants to define the term as an offshoot of conservatism, mixing racism, white nationalism, and populism. NPR wants more clarity, too, suggesting simply white nationalist. The liberal website Think Progress says it's dropping the term altogether because it conceals overt racism. But if the goal is telling people what the alt-right thinks,
hail Trump, hail our people, hail victory,
their own words might be the best guide.
So this afternoon, actually, the New York Times issued some guidelines on this, and I just have to say they got it 99% right in my view. They say you can't just toss the term out. It's not going to go away, even if you don't use it. But they say you have to add some kind of descriptive, whether it's nativism or nationalism or spreading. You have to say what it is. The part that I think they got wrong is that they also endorsed calling it so-called. I don't think you should ever use that phrase. We've tried to sort of read that out of any kind of language because it is called that. It's not so-called. It is called that. So, but that's how I think. I think the AP has it partly right too. That for the short term anyway, I think you have to explain it, and then once everybody gets it, I think you can just call it the alt-right.
I thought the AP did pretty well.
Yeah.
That was a good, clear explanation of what it is, and I do think it's important that we not drop it because it is different.
Yeah.
It's a newer generation. It's very technologically savvy. So the beliefs may be just as bad as the white supremacists of old, but they're not the white supremacists of old. There's something different. And so it's important we use the term and explain what it is.
We definitely need to explain it, but because I think there's a definitional problem. Even people listening to the show, some of them probably don't know exactly what we're talking about. There's clearly the alt-right of the white nationalists and the skinheads and the neo-Nazis, but there's also the alt-right, which is basically the irreverent guerrilla journalism, anti-establishment, new media, of which Andrew Breitbart led the, was a part and led the way. And those people aren't necessarily, certainly those categories overlap, there's no question, but they are not the same, and they're also not mutually exclusive. So I think it's important to say, are we talking about anti-establishment guerrilla journalism, which may not be in any way racist, or are we talking about actual racism? And the problem with the term alt-right is that it both legitimizes racism. At the same time, it delegitimizes conservatism by portraying it as racist.
I think, it's good that journalists are having these kinds of discussions, and while this particular phrase might get more attention than some of the others, these are the kinds of discussions that happen in newsrooms, or have been happening in newsrooms for decades.
Yeah.
When it comes to illegal immigrants, should you use that, or should you use undocumented, folks in this country? There's so many different terms that sometimes we have to sit down. When there are new terms, you have to sort of define. Sometimes you have to put them in a broader context when you use them. And then eventually, as has been pointed out here, you can then start using the term. But I agree with everyone that you shouldn't just get rid of the term, but you should not just use it standalone.
Well, of course, you cannot get rid of the term. That's not going to function. My problem, Jennifer, is that I'm not quite clear. I see examples of when it's only this and not the racist part that most people refer to.
Do you think everyone who writes for Breitbart is a white supremacist?
I'm not characterizing the people who write for it. I'm talking about the product.
So you think the product is a white supremacist product?
I think it's a lot. That's mostly what
I
see.
I mean, you read it regularly?
Yeah, I see enough of it. So I'm just saying that I'm not certain. You're free to show me some examples where that's not the case.
I think there are many, many articles on
As I said,
probably 99% of them that are very conservative and anti-establishment and guerrilla tactics and not at all racist.
Again, that's not been my what I've read, but I'm always open to hearing something else. I just wanted to get back to your so-called. I'm not a fan of so-called, but I think that it refers to some people say it. So I don't know that you. I mean, so I'm okay with thinking.
I don't think it applies in this case, though.
I don't know.
It is called that.
But
yeah, they call themselves that.
Yeah, they call themselves
okay,
that.
but all right. Okay, I'm not totally wrong.
A lot of this terminology. I was even thinking about Obamacare. Journalists did a lot of hand wringing about Obamacare when that term was first used, and then Obama embraced it, and now everybody has embraced it. And I actually take that one step further to the public accommodations bill, where right towards the end, when it was clear it was going to be passed, people felt comfortable calling it the bathroom bill, including the mainstream media, which was very careful not to call it that in the beginning. So these terms, they.
But I think you're right to say
derive.
that we should be careful about how because words do matter, and so we want to be able to be clear about what we are saying. And so to everybody's point, the more that we can articulate exactly what we mean, even if it's in the moment, because I think this is going to begin to hone down into something that probably we will all use at some point.
I just think we need to be careful not to legitimize racists or delegitimize genuine political conservatives.
Well, I'm not one to want to legitimize racists. I can tell you. That's not my page.
That's true, Callie.
That is not my page.